Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in second volume of the trilogy by Samar Rain, the Pioneer Saga trilogy. We're going to take a look at chapter 3, and we're going to take a look at the philosophy of art as we close out this lesson. But we have to ask ourselves the question, what makes a English literature narrative a literary narrative and worthy to be studied? And basically it means that the narrative must be able to present a storyline with two and maybe even three levels of meaning. The surface story, then a symbolic level of meaning, and fundamentally, what you're really looking for in literary work is an existential level of meaning. In other words, how does this novel speak to the universal questions for human existence? And we have that in Rain's work. These are issues that all of us have faced. You've got how do we resolve problems that we face in family relationships. And we're going to look at a continuation of that process in this chapter, but that's really what we do. We actually have a novel here that gives us a surface story of the Chase Adler marriage, and their children are all adults now and seeking to begin their own careers. And so we end up with questions about not only relationships to the children now that they are adults, but the relationships between Peyton and her husband at this more mature state in their marriage. And these are questions that all human beings face, and so it has a very universal appeal at a very fundamental existential level, and that's why we enter into this analysis of the literature just in the same way, for example, as Shakespeare. When I attended Dallas Baptist University, my major was religion and philosophy, but my minor was English literature. And I took a course in Shakespeare, and the reason that we studied Shakespeare and read the plays was to discuss the deeper existential meaning behind the writing of Shakespeare. Because Shakespeare addressed very, very universal, fundamental questions of human existence, and that is why every university has a class in Shakespeare. That's why he's important for self-understanding, and he's important for self-consciousness. And in the same way, Ingmar Bergman, his films have a very deep existential meaning to them, as I've mentioned before. And Rain, in her novels, has a surface story, of course, and even a symbolic level of meaning, but at the very depth of the literary heart of her writing, there is the universal questions of human existence and a deep existential meaning to what she is giving us in the narrative. And as we go through these lessons, we're addressing the universal questions of humanity. We're addressing the quest for spiritual self-consciousness, the questions for spiritual awareness. All of these are universal in nature, and they are behind the surface story that we confront in this Pioneer Ranch saga. Let's go to block 1 and get started. The music room, aesthetics for Ricky. Ricky played the violin, and Royce accompanied him on the piano. Claire, Royce's granddaughter, talks with Peyton about Bryce and how she could be modeling. She's very attractive, and Claire says, Bryce could be a model if she desired to do so. And Peyton says that Bryce doesn't have any aspirations toward modeling, but has appeared on a few magazine covers anyway as a temporary interest. After the musical performance, Ricky says of himself that he prays to God that he's just able to get it right when it comes to his musical ability. A very humble attitude, an attitude of thankfulness that he has this gift of being able to play the violin. And I like that about Ricky. So here we know that Mikey, or Hanovi, is the artist, and now we know that Ricky is the violinist. They both have a creative aesthetic outlet, and I think that's very, very powerful. And they get that, of course, from probably both parents, but especially from Peyton, who is an artist herself. Now, note 2, block 1, note 2. And Ricky, we found the very evident aspect of humility. Now we look at Gideon again and the absence of humility. Gideon had headed toward the stables where Bryce was practicing. Peyton knew this was trouble, and so she had headed toward the stables herself. She arrives just in time to find that William has punched Gideon, knocked him to the ground, and he had to do it to protect Bryce because Gideon was trying to attack Bryce, trying to attack his sister. William stepped in and punched Gideon in the face and knocked him to the ground. And we get a little note from Peyton that one psychiatrist had even diagnosed Gideon as narcissistic, psychopathetic, and Machiavellian. So Gideon has the malevolent core. Adler defends Gideon and says he only needs a little bit of discipline, but the atmosphere of the party has completely done a 180. Now it's very edgy. Everybody's upset, all because of Gideon. Bryce peers out from behind what we're told is just a veneer of celebration. The celebratory atmosphere is gone. The celebratory atmosphere is completely gone because of Gideon. Gideon enters the dining room and spouts insults out again. And even says out loud, "Give my Camaro to Father Gabriel, he needs a car, and buy me a brand new vet." Give my Camaro to Father Gabriel, and buy me a new Corvette. Good old egoism, good old entitlement. The sin of entitlement, that just describes Gideon to a T. It's all about the self. It's all about me, I. No humility, pure egoism. Let's move on to block 2. Okay, block 2. Father Gabriel and Gideon enter into a dialogue. Father Gabriel says, "Egoism is not the way to live." Gideon says, "Don't lecture me, you're a Catholic priest. Don't you have a child to molest somewhere?" Good grief. Punch him out again. Peyton says, "Apologize this instant." Gideon responds, "Why? Is the truth a sin?" Adler walks in and says, "Stop." Emphatically, he says, "Stop." Peyton then sends Gideon out of the dining room and back to his own room. Evacuation. Adler says he's going to take Gideon to the house in Kama for some fishing, just with himself and Gideon. Karina arrives, that's William's girlfriend. He didn't think she was going to show up at this party, but evidently she knew where he was and she showed up. Bryce decides to go to the door to check out the competition, and the girlfriend is drop dead gorgeous, supermodel gorgeous, and of course Bryce doesn't care for that. Peyton intercepts her daughter and escorts her into her father's old study, and they leave William alone for the meantime. Now we're at that intersection of space and time for a mother and a daughter in the old study. The banjo clock still hangs where it used to hang. Bryce bursts into tears and confesses to her mother that she loves William. Peyton tells her daughter, "It's time for both of us to give up this suffering." And the question comes up, is this something that is impossible? Can you really give up suffering? And especially when Peyton realizes that it's really part of the Chase DNA. So that becomes a very fundamental question. Can you really escape this suffering? Isn't it really a part of the life struggle anyway? But Peyton wants to address it along with Bryce, her daughter. Let's move on to block 3 and ask ourselves a couple of questions. Okay. Block 3, note 1. How can the artwork of Harlow, Peyton, and Hanovi be considered spiritual artwork? And I found a very good essay. Like I say, I've studied Hegel all my life. And he has a philosophy of aesthetics. And there are 2 key aspects to that philosophy of art. Art, it reflects the ideal of interpenetrability, meaning that nature and spirit interpenetrate each other in the work of art. Nature and spirit interpenetrate each other in the work of art. It also reflects the self-consciousness of absolute spirit, which is layered over the skeletal structure of history. Those 2 aspects are present in genuine fine art. And I can speak to that myself because before I became paralyzed from a massive stroke, I used to have, as a hobby, hiking the national parks with all of my camera equipment, and I did fine art photography. I wasn't just photographing landscapes. My intention was to do fine art photography in the same manner as Ansel Adams had done. Ansel Adams is the premier example of a photographer who did fine art photography. And what you really are trying to do in fine art photography is reveal that interpenetration of nature and spirit together. My most famous photograph, the photograph of El Capitan that won the Parade magazine photo contest, and it had to beat out 64,000 entries, so it had quite a bit of competition. But that photograph did, to the best of my ability, it did represent the interpenetration of spirit with nature. It wasn't a postcard, it was fine art photography, and to this day I still interpret that moment as a moment of encountering the divine absolute spirit in that moment. It was I was on my way out of the park. It was a last-minute decision to hike down to the Merced River, and it was during a sleet storm, and the sleet storm the sun broke through just for about 20 minutes. I had 20 minutes of light refracting off of ice particles, and I just got into the muddy shoreline of the Merced River, set up my tripod, fired off about 30 shots or so, and then worked on them later in the digital darkroom. And to get that image, and again, I'll say it, that image of spirit interpenetrating nature. That's the goal of fine art painting, and that's the goal of fine art photography. So I agree completely with what Hegel teaches here. The ideal of interpenetrability. Nature and spirit interpenetrate each other in the work of art. There's also a self-consciousness of absolute spirit that is layered over the structure of history. I agree with all of that. Now, the second question we ask in Block 3, is it really possible to give up suffering? Peyton confesses tension with Adler concerning how to raise their son. She confesses being on a quest for resolution in her life. And she tells Bryce that she will have to pass through suffering. You can't go around it. You have to go through it. It is the only way. She then recalls her own past romance with Ashton before the romance with Adler. Peyton concludes with the closing advice to her daughter: stay open to all possibilities. Remain open to all possibilities in life. So we close out this lesson with these two questions. And because the novel does center around art, Peyton's mother was a famous, nationally famous artist. We know from Volume 1. And then Peyton now is a famous artist in her own right. And her son, Hanovi, is a artist who tries to really do fine art painting. He tries to reveal the interpenetration of nature with spirit. That very much applies to Hanovi, her son. So I think that Block 3, Note 1, for me, I'd put a big circle around that. That's where we were going in this novel. We're dealing with a family of painters. Harlow was a famous painter. She did encapsulate the Pueblo Indian culture into her painting. And Peyton is dramatically very influential in her painting. And she again wants to capture the Pueblo history and the spiritual dimension to life that the Pueblo Indian culture to this day holds very dear to. And so she raised her son with that same sensitivity, Hanovi, Mikey, but his grandmother, who was a native Pueblo Indian, gave him the Indian name Hanovi, and he clings to that name. He has taken as his name Hanovi, and Peyton calls him Hanovi. Others might call him Mikey, but Peyton knows that he's to be called Hanovi, the Indian name. But he's a painter who is very much grounded in the spirit. Hanovi believes in the absolute spirit. Hanovi participates in the absolute spirit. Hanovi tries to depict the interpenetrability of nature with spirit. So all of this comes into play, and that's going to wrap up our chapter 3. And next lesson we will pick up from here. Where do we go? Let's see. We're going pages 56 to 68. 56 to 68 in our next lesson. That wraps up chapter 3.